$40,000 in damage, breaking windows and penetrating offices where employees work. Search of Wood's home recovered a 12-gauge shotgun and ammunition. Police also found literature critical of the Federal Reserve Bank. Wood is charged with reckless discharge of a firearm and 2 counts of damaging property. Men are facing racketeering charges after who are accused of stealing $1 million in merchandise from area retailers and selling it on the internet. Prosecutors say Randall Simmons stole from stores all over the metro, and Brian Bowman was selling items on eBay. Investigators say a wide variety of items were stolen, including vacuum cleaners from Walmart and Blue Jeans front porch. Time now is 2:06.
Support us online from aging actively means giving you the things you enjoy. That's why Alliant Health Aetna offers Medicare plans with a whole new starting this fall. Alliant Health Aetna Medicare, AHA.Medicare101.com.
And from the Minnesota State Fair, this is MPR News. I'm Mike Mulcahy. It's a little wet, but things are getting better. We're doing all right. The fair is a great place to meet politicians and talk politics. And in that spirit, we're going to spend this hour hearing from 2 candidates running to represent you in the United States Senate. DFL Senator Amy Klobachar is seeking a 3rd term. She was first elected in 2006. Before becoming senator, she served 8 years as Hennepin County attorney. And as you can hear, she has some supporters here at our booth at the State Fairgrounds. The Republican candidate is State Representative Jim Newberger of Becker. And you can hear his supporters are here as well. He was first elected to the Minnesota House in 2012. In his career outside politics, he was a paramedic. Thank you both for being here, candidates.
Thanks, Mike.
I appreciate it. We won't have a lot of ground rules this hour. I'll ask some questions. I did ask listeners to send questions in earlier, so I'll mix some of those in as well. We want to give each candidate a fair chance to speak, so I would ask the candidates, even though you're running for Senate, don't filibuster. And I'll ask the audience, we want you to be into the conversation, but also respectful of the candidates. So let's forego opening statements and ask Jim Newberger, why should voters elect you to the U.S. Senate?
Well, thank you, Mike. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here today and for the great Minnesota get-together. I've been coming to the State Fair since I was a kid. We used to take the bus here, spend all our money, and then hope to scrounge some change to take the bus home. I'm Jim Newberger, and I love the fair. I love this state. I've been born and raised. I've lived here all my life. And I serve in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I worked for 30 years as a paramedic for a level 1 trauma center right here in the Metro. And I want to reach out to Minnesota. I want to be your voice in the U.S. Senate. For over a decade, there has only been one predominant voice in the U.S. Senate, and that's been the voice of the progressive far left. Senator Klobachar has voted 90% rubber stamp with the progressive far left, the Obama administration. And folks, if you're in the moderate middle all the way to the conservative right, you have not had a voice for almost a decade. Folks, it's time that you had a voice. It's time that you have a senator that does something for you.
Okay. Thank you. Amy Klobachar, why are you running for another term? Why should you get another term?
Well, first, I want to welcome everyone to the fair as well, these intrepid fair goers that were willing to sit through the rain. And we have had a parting of the clouds for the debate, and we're pretty excited about that. So I think we need a senator that focuses on bread and butter issues for Minnesota. And that is what I've done since I got to the Senate. Everything from getting the funding for the 35W bridge with then Senator Coleman, to working on the beautiful Stillwater Bridge, which we finally got done, to doing things about workforce training, such a big issue in our state where we have a 3% unemployment rate. And I believe we're at a moment in time that we should be governing from opportunity and not from crisis. And so the other thing I think you need in a senator is someone who will work across the aisle, as I literally have had 18 of my bills where I've been the lead Democrat signed into law with President Trump in office. But you need someone that can find common ground, but is also willing to be a check and balance on this administration. I think those two things are very important right now.
All right, let's talk about some of those bread and butter issues. Jim Newberger, what would you do in the Senate to make health care more affordable and available to the people of Minnesota?
Well, thank you, Mike. As a paramedic for 30 years, I do understand this issue. I know what it's like to show up at your home and have people agonize over the fact that I can't go to the hospital because I don't have insurance. And they're having a significant issue, and you have to do everything within your power just to bring them into the emergency room so that they can get the care that they need. Minnesota was the model for the nation. Back before Obamacare, we had a safety net program called Minnesota Care. We had a free market system. It wasn't the best, but it was one of the best in the nation. Obamacare came along. Senator Klobachar has been a champion for Obamacare, a champion for it, and she still is. The point being is this, as a state representative, I saw the majority of my constituents came to me and they said, you know what, our rates have gone up by 60%. 60%. What are we going to do? We don't have insurance. They got priced out of the market. Their financial planners told them, they said, listen, are you healthy? If you are, take the risk, because if you can't afford the insurance, you might be able to afford paying the penalty when you finally do get insurance or you finally do get a new job where you can. I spent the first 2 years as a state representative helping people with their MNsure Obamacare nightmare. And now we've been able to start to roll back some of that. We need to go back to a free market system, and we need to have and reinstitute the Minnesota Care Program as a safety net for our most vulnerable members. And we need to reach out to these people. We can do this, but Senator Klobachar is now supporting this Medicare for All. Folks, that's Obamacare.
Okay, Senator Klobachar.
Wait a second, Mike. I was interrupted by the audience. Folks, how are you going to pay for $32 trillion? $32 trillion for Medicare for All. We don't have that money, folks. I know you don't. We can't afford it.
All right, Senator Klobachar on health care.
Thank you. I respect Representative Newberger's work and EMT. It's one of the hardest jobs out there. But I believe in healthcare, we need to move forward and not backwards. And to me, that means making sure that we protect what we have, which is making sure people are not thrown off of their insurance for pre-existing conditions. That is over half of our population. And there were 3 brave Republicans that stood with Democrats to make sure that that didn't happen last summer. That happened. And we need a senator that continues to protect that, as well as keeping kids on their insurance till they're 26 years old. But we must make improvements. That means, first of all, passing the Alexander Murray bill, that I've been a strong supporter of. It builds on the work that the state legislature did with Governor Dayton to make sure that we used reinsurance to try to bring down the rates and stabilize them, and that we also, in this bill, fund Minnesota's basic health care plan that would bring in hundreds of millions of dollars to our state. Finally, taking on pharma prices. It is outrageous what we are seeing.
Okay.
Literally, pharma thinks they own Washington, and we have to show them they don't. 4 of the top 10 drugs have gone up over 100% in the past 10 years. EpiPen, 6 times. We brought that down thanks to your work and my work. Insulin up 3 times where it should be. That's why we need to pass my bill with Senator McCain to allow for less expensive drugs in from Canada. We have to allow for negotiation under Medicare Part D, something the Republican Party has been dragging their feet on, even though the president claims he supports it.
Jim Newberger, what would you do to bring those prescription drug prices down?
Thank you, Mike. That's a great question. The first thing we need to do is we need to bring the big pharma in, and we have to have these hearings to find out why exactly these drugs cost so much. I agree. Medicine is way overpriced. An EpiPen is in the hundreds of dollars. The last time I looked, it was close to $600, depending on the plan that you have. Folks, we can do better. And we should do better, but I find it a little bit disturbing that Senator Klobachar wants to bring big pharma in to explain why our meds cost so much when we don't hear about her bringing in the big education bodies, the big education entities to find out why tuition costs so much. Folks, that goes both ways.
Senator Klobachar, any response to that?
Well, to talk about tuition here, I think when you look at Minnesota's unemployment rate, we have to have a major change when it comes to how we think about K through 12 and what jobs are out there that need to be filled. So we have tons of jobs. Our manufacturers right now say that there's 68% of them can't find people for some of the manufacturing jobs we have. People are retiring in the trades. So a major focus on science, engineering, technology. I passed a few bills on that in the last few years. And then also making sure that kids know that there are many paths to success. My own sister didn't graduate from high school. She got her GED, and then she went on to go to a manufacturing and go to a community college in Iowa, and ended up eventually, after a number of years, becoming an accountant with a 4-year degree. My dad got a 2-year degree. So we need to make sure these kids, many of whom aren't graduating at all, understand that that's a path, as well as making it easier to pay for tuition. I favor allowing kids to refinance. We now have a better rate for new students, but we want to allow people to refinance their student loans to the rate that we have now. And that would be a great boost to our economy.
Jim Newberger, I'll give you another chance to talk about education. Go ahead.
Yeah, refinancing your debt. That's not a solution. How about bringing down your debt? How about bringing down your debt? I got my bachelor's degree in 1982, and we paid $18 a credit, and I thought that was outrageous. Right now, it's in the hundreds of dollars per credit. Why? Why? Who wants to just refinance their debt? Let's bring down the cost, and we can do that. We have the power to do that. Refinancing your debt means you're still in debt. Bring down the price, just like she wants to do with Big Pharma.
Well, let me turn to one of the duties of the Senate, and that is to vote on the nominations of the president. The Judiciary Committee, as you know, has scheduled hearings for the week after next on President Trump's nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Yeah. Senator Klobachar, you're on the committee. Have you made up your mind how you will vote? And if not, what are you looking to hear? Yes,
I said that a number of weeks ago, that this nominee is what we don't need right now. I did have I met with him, and I appreciated him coming to meet with me because I still think these hearings are incredibly important. That being said, we are in a situation right now where only 2% of the documents from his time in the White House have been made public. 2%. Only 6% of them have been given to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that's why I think, in a Minnesota way, and as a former prosecutor, we want to be able to look at the evidence before we have a hearing. We are literally going into hearing with seeing only 6% of the documents. The second thing I'd say is this is an incredibly important position. Over the last decades, the Supreme Court has made decisions about who you can marry, about where you can go to school, about what the safety regulations are that protect you at work. And when you look at the record of this nominee, you see someone who has not been in the mainstream. He has advocated for a very expansive role of executive power, including saying that a president should be able to declare laws unconstitutional himself. He has said that you should be able to, that we should pass a law to strike down the special counsel statute, which is exactly the opposite of where the Senate Judiciary came, where Democrats and Republicans voted for a bill that would strengthen that statute. He was in the dissent on protecting the net neutrality rules. He has had a very conservative view of enforcing antitrust laws at a time when we've seen a record number of mergers. And he actually wrote a dissent where he said he would strike down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's why this is not the nominee for this time. We need a check and balance and an independent judge on the Supreme Court.
Okay, Jim Newberger, where are you on would you vote if you were a senator to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, and what factors would you weigh when you're considering future nominations?
Well, thank you, Mike. I would continue forward with these proceedings. Right now, the Supreme Court is supposed to go back into its session this fall. There's a number of cases that are coming before the Supreme Court. There are no laws that are being violated in this nomination process. I repeat, they aren't violating anything. Everything that's going on currently at this time is politically charged. The DFL and the extreme progressive liberals, they want to hold it all up. They want to wait till after the midterms so they can go in there and change this and change our court with political ambitions. Folks, that's not America, and that's not the way we work. And And with Senator Klobachar right now with her remarks, it only goes to prove that we've only had the far left extreme progressive voice for the last 10 years. If you're a moderate middle or if you go to the conservative side, this is proof positive right there that this is the progressive plan in action.
Senator Klobuchar.
Sure. I just wanted to respond on two fronts. One is when you look at the position that was taken with the Merrick Garland nomination, where in fact we were told repeatedly that we should wait until after the election. A number of my colleagues, my Republican colleagues, actually brought up the Senate, that we should wait till we see how the Senate turns out after the election, which is exactly what we're facing right now. Secondly, as far as my record, you look at the numbers. A Medill survey in the last Congress, I was voted as #1 senator for getting bills that I sponsored or co-sponsored passed into law in the Senate. I have worked in the middle, and I evaluate things on their merit. And when Mike brought up nominees, there are nominees from this administration that I have supported, including those involved in our military, like General Mattis, including those like Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, because while they may not have been my first choice, I believe that it's very important that we have strong, experienced people running those very important agencies for our government.
All right, let me go to a question I got from a listener about immigration. And the question is, what is your position on open borders, and do you support the president's plan to build a wall on the Mexican border? And also, what should happen to the 11 million people living here illegally now? Jim Newberger, let's start with you on that one.
Well, thank you. Mike, that's an excellent question. First of all, I support our president in his plan to secure our borders. We must build the wall. We must build the wall. We must secure our border. The simple analogy is this. If you don't believe in building the wall or securing the border, then leave your front door wide open all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If that doesn't bother you, then leave it wide open and let anyone who wants come into your house and do whatever they care to do, because that's exactly what we are doing with our nation. That's the first thing we do. I support wholeheartedly 100% legal immigration. Folks, that's what we have to do. With the DACA, folks, I tell you what, there is no mistake. Their parents violated American law. They were brought here illegally. Now, they are not responsible for what their parents did, but doesn't change the fact that they were brought here illegally. Their parents violated the law. Should we send them back, or can we send them back? That would be impossible. But what we can do is allow them to have permanent resident alien status because their parents violated the law when they brought them here.
Senator Klobuchar on immigration.
I have long supported comprehensive immigration reform, and this is why. First of all, the bill that we passed in the Senate with bipartisan support, including Midwestern Republicans like Senator Hoeven of North Dakota, provided for strong border security, actually $46 billion in border security, which have been a combination of things that our security and our Homeland Security people would have said would have been effective. Everything from some wall, some fence, and some personnel. Secondly, I believe that you should have strong security provisions for employers to check on employees to make sure that what they're doing and who they're hiring is legal. But we simply have to be confronted with the reality that we have, as Mike pointed out, 12 million people here. And that's why I supported the bill, which was a path to earn citizenship over many, many years, making sure people hadn't violated the law, making sure that they also could speak English, you name it. It was a long path to citizenship. What's interesting about this from a fiscal standpoint for our country and where we are now, because that bill languished over in the House next to, I don't know, the frozen peas in Paul Ryan's freezer and went nowhere. What's interesting about this, despite past support from President Bush for comprehensive immigration reform, strong support from President Obama is that at the time of that bill, it was Grover Norquist's top priority. Why? It brought the federal debt down by $158 billion in 10 years, because people would have come out of the shadow and paid their taxes, because we would have had a stronger economy, and because that's how we pay for that border security. So when you look at what would be best for our country in terms of security, in terms of unleashing economic potential, it is comprehensive immigration reform.
Okay, Jim Newberger wants to respond.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Mike. I don't know. I'm not a math whiz, but I'll tell you this: $158 billion over 10 years. That's about just under 16 per year. 16 billion per year.
That sounds like a lot of money to me.
What is that compared? What is that compared to $25 trillion in national debt? That's number one. That's not even a drop in the bucket, folks. So when you say we're going to bring down our debt by about 15, roughly 16 billion per year compared to 25 trillion, that's nothing. And the other thing, folks, is this: if we would have had comprehensive immigration reform where we knew who was coming across our border, would Molly have been killed in Iowa?
Senator, hold on.
First of all, the family has asked that people not politicize this tragic death. And as a former prosecutor, I believe that murder should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That being said, comprehensive immigration reform contains something very important, which was adequate funding for E-Verify. And when you look back at that bill in 2013, it went into effect, modernized E-Verify immediately for big companies, then companies with 500, and within 4 years for agricultural workers. That would have allowed small employers, farmers, and others who employed people to adequately check out the people that worked for them. You can do the math of when that would have taken effect if it had passed the House in 2013, because President Obama was ready to sign it into law. That was comprehensive immigration reform.
All right, let me bring up another subject as long as we brought up legal issues. And on Tuesday of this week, two things happened in court. The president's former campaign manager was found guilty of several counts, and his former lawyer pleaded guilty to several counts. How concerned are you that Michael Cohen implicated the president in campaign finance violations? Do you believe the president broke the law? Senator Klobachar, start with you.
I am a former prosecutor, and I believe you look at the evidence before you. So my reaction to this was, of course, this is a very serious matter when you have the president's lawyer and the president's campaign chair, one convicted, one pleading guilty to such charges, especially the words of his lawyer regarding campaign finance. But what this means to me is to allow the Mueller investigation to continue. There are voices that want to shut it down. I think we have to get to the bottom of the truth, and I think we do that not only with regard to who else is implicated in this, but also with regard to protecting our country from foreign interference in our elections. This is something that isn't just about what happened in the past. It's what can happen in the future. We just had a briefing just this week from the head of the FBI, the president's national intelligence director, the head of Homeland Security, telling us, and I'm not telling you a secret because they've said it publicly at the White House, that the lights are blinking red, that they have seen this happen in 2016, and we're going to see it happen again if we don't protect ourselves. And that is why I am working every single day to pass the Secure Elections Act with my Republican colleague, Senator Langford, and working to make sure that we are protected. I just talked to Secretary of State Steve Simon this morning, that our elections are protected in Minnesota and across the country. So yes, these are serious charges, and we have to allow law enforcement to do their jobs. But at the same time, my job as a senator is to protect us going forward.
Okay. Jim Newberger, your reaction to what happened in
Thank you,
court
Mike. I
this week
appreciate
regarding
that.
the president.
Well, there's been a lot said here, but what this boils down to is one simple principle. Right now, it's being politicized. It's been nothing but Senator Klobachar's ambition to impeach our president. And folks, that's all that they're aiming for. They're going to politicize this until they get what they want. It paralyzes our country. This does no good for our state. How does this help us move forward when we're only focusing on this? What about the good things our president has done in the last 2 years? Have you looked at your 401k lately? Have you looked at your 401k? How is the market doing? How is our unemployment level right now? We haven't seen unemployment levels like this since the Reagan years. But yet, what do we have? We have the politicization of this issue where they're trying to build a case just to impeach our president. Folks, we're better than this. I know we are. And when you send me to the U.S. Senate, I will make sure that I continue on a path to move our state forward, not bog us down in political infighting.
Senator?
I believe we do have a job in the United States Senate to protect our democracy. And I have been joined by so many of my Republican colleagues, and clearly Representative Newberger would not expect to be someone that would be this check and balance. But so many of them have said that our goal is to protect that investigation when it comes to judiciary matters. That being said, we can do two things at once, right? We can work on protecting our democracy while focusing on our economy. And governing from opportunity instead of crisis means doing something about the workforce shortage we have in Minnesota with smart workforce training, like the work we've done in just passing the Perkins bill on a bipartisan basis, and my proposals to be able to use education accounts to pay for some of our technical training. We have to continue, as we just talked about, to bring farmer prices down, to protect people so that they can raise their family and pay for college and pay for housing and make sure they can afford everything from cable to airfares while there's major mergers going on all over the country. We can do two things at once, and I think the people of our state understand that.
Representative Newberg, let me just, Newberger, let me just be clear. Would you vote to protect the Mueller investigation or not?
I would vote at this point to carry forward as long as we are obeying and staying within the parameters of our law.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me change the subject. There was a lot of debate, and there still is, about the tax cuts that passed last year. Had you been in the Senate, would you have voted for that tax cut bill?
Mike, thank you. Absolutely, I would have voted for that tax cut bill. That's some of the most comprehensive tax reform that we have seen since the Ronald Reagan era. Every one of you are going to be able to have a double of your standard deduction. You wait until you do your taxes next year before you curse our president on this one. Our president moved our nation forward with the best tax package that we had seen, like I said, in 2 decades. One of the things that I was very distraught about was the fact that Senator Klobachar, again, who rubber-stamped for the far progressive left and voted no, she voted against this. She voted against you. She voted against you keeping more of your money. That's what she did. She voted against you keeping more of your money. And one of the most egregious parts of this, in my opinion, is included in this tax package was the repeal of the death tax. The death tax. Now, we were at Farm Fest just about a week and a half ago, and what this death tax repeal did is it says, you know what, if you're in a certain income, if you're in the upper level income bracket and you die, you know what, if you want to pass your farm back, keep it in the family, you're not going to get fleeced. You can keep the family farm in the family, because if you look at the net worth of most of these family farms, they're in the multi-millions of dollars because they have to be, because of the equipment and the land and everything they have to purchase. But you cannot pass your farm along in the past without getting fleeced. How do we keep these family farms in the family? Donald Trump came along, and with this tax bill, we repealed that tax. We made it easier to keep your farm in the family. Senator Klobachar, she voted no.
Senator Klobachar, on the tax bill.
I've long supported tax reform. I voted for a number of tax cuts while I've been in the United States Senate, but I viewed this bill as a major missed opportunity. I was in the group that wanted to see the federal corporate tax rate go down. And I supported that and stood with other senators that wanted to see that. but I didn't want to see it go down to the point where it puts Medicare funding at risk, where it puts Social Security at risk, where it puts our basic services for this country at risk. Every point it went down was $100 billion. You think about that. If it was set at, say, 25% instead of the 21% where it ended up, each point $100 billion, $100 billion that could have gone to bringing down our debt, $100 billion that could have paid for rural broadband and infrastructure. As for the estate tax, I have long supported a compromise on that. But again, this went too far. And it's going to add, you can look at any numbers, please Google it, it's going to add $1 trillion in debt to this country. And I believe that we could have done better and must do better than that.
All right, thanks, folks. Let's be respectful. We only have a certain amount of time here. Let me ask you this question, Senator. The Trump administration recently reversed what's called the Clean Power Plan, arguing that coal power is cheaper and better for the economy. I got this question from a listener. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not agree with that, and let me explain why. First of all, this is something where Representative Neuberger and I completely differ. In a recent questionnaire from WCCO-TV, when asked, do you think climate change is real? He answered with one word, no. That is against 98 senators in the U.S. Senate who voted 98-1 that climate change is occurring. And we see it, whether it is the 5 hottest years in the last 8 years in the history of our world, whether it is what we have seen in terms of rising sea levels with the melting glaciers, the ice sheet in Greenland, what we've seen with the raging wildfires in California. So when I look at this, it is a real problem, and you couldn't see a starker difference between me and my opponent where he won't even admit that it is occurring, which is against science. What should we do about it? Number one, you don't leave the International Climate Change Agreement and become the only country in America, in the world, not to do that. America is the only country that is no longer in that agreement. Even Nicaragua and Syria rejoined it. Okay, number two, you keep some sensible clean power rules in place. And that is what we were working on. And in fact, Excel and Minnesota Power, we're going to meet those goals. We've seen companies like Cargill and General Mills out front on climate change. And that is why, no, I do not favor what the Trump administration has done with environmental rules. It really, when you look at those numbers on climate change and the effect it's going to have on our country, it's a negative when it comes to our future. Okay. And I think we have to protect our future.
Jim Neuberger on climate change, coal power, and clean energy.
Thank you, Mike. Well, this is right in my wheelhouse. I appreciate the question. Number one, I live in Becker, Minnesota, and I've lived 1/2 mile downwind from the largest coal power plant in the Midwest. It fires enough energy to supply half of this state. Half of this state. And I have never been more proud of the people that work at that plant and the IBEW who have supported me in my race ever since I first ran back in 2012. And I want to boil this back. Do I believe in climate change? Yeah, I do. I believe in climate change. Do I believe it's man-made? No, I do not. Climate change, the number one factor in climate change is the sun, and we cannot change how the sun operates. Number one. Number two, number two, I'm going to put this in front of you because this is the part that doesn't connect. If this was true, if we were to stay within the Paris Climate Accords, the Paris 21st Century 21 Climate Accords, if we were to stay in that, which is when we pulled out of that agreement, why? Why are we shutting down all of these power plants in the United States? If you look right now, they are opening coal plants in South Korea, Japan, Poland, Africa, Russia, all over the world. They are opening in Germany because their nuclear program did not work. They opened up, they don't call them coal plants because it's not politically correct. They call them lignite plants, but they are opening coal plants all over the world. So why are we punishing? If this was such an issue, why are you punishing? Why is the Senate and why did the Obama administration, why are they punishing the American power providers? Minnesota used to have the cheapest power rates in the nation. Now we have industries that do not come here because it's cost prohibitive. Folks, if you're going to talk about coal plants being evil, then you better apply that to the whole world, because you're not. You're applying it to the United States only, and you're punishing us.
Senator Klobachar.
Thank you. I first want to point out that this view that climate change isn't occurring, which is what I asked people to look at WCCO TV survey when the question was, do you believe in climate change? And his answer was no. This is an extreme view. I'm looking at my father-in-law, who spent his life teaching biology in the front row there at Minnesota State, now retired. This is an extreme view that is not held by the scientists of this country. The second thing is, yes, you have an all and above approach to energy. Yes, we're not going to get rid of all our coal plants, but we are going to be transitioning, and over time you transition. This was an effort first led by Governor Pawlenty in the state of Minnesota. He worked with Democrats, and we got one of the most aggressive renewable electricity standards in the country. Right? 25% by 2025. And we are on track to meet that standard. So this is something where I believe people have to come together and not be on the extremes if we're going to tackle this in a sensible way. And that is why you see a number of companies working on this. Go talk to them. You see a number of people on both sides of the aisle trying to come up with some sensible approaches to climate change. And by denying it exists, you can't even answer the question of how we're going to get there.
Representative Newberger, go ahead.
It still does not change the fact that we're closing down coal plants in the United States while they're allowing the production and the opening of brand new coal plants like Dandelions all over the rest of the world. If you're going to have a standard, then it better apply to the whole world, and it doesn't. This is hypocrisy at its finest. Thank you.
All right, a somewhat related question from a listener. Should we be subsidizing ethanol? Is it good for the environment? Representative Newberger, start with you.
Thank you. Meeting with our corn producers and our agricultural providers at FarmFest, and also representing a district who is one of its primary economic engines is ag. Yes, I do support this. This is a vital and important part of our economy, and I think that we should continue to support that, because if we support that, then we support our Minnesota industry.
Senator Klobachar.
I've long been a leader for biofuels. Senator Grassley and I have led a number of the efforts to make sure we have a strong biofuels industry. And let me tell you why. We don't want everything to be oil, right? We want to see not the resources not going to those farmers. We want the resources to go to the farmers and workers of the Midwest instead of the oil cartels of the Mideast. And that's why Senator Grassley and I have taken this on, everything from a strong renewable fuel standard to making sure that the current administration, and Grassley and I took them on big time when they were granting secret waivers to oil companies to get out of that standard. This was under Director Pruitt, who has now left the administration, and we took that on because they were literally undermining the standard. So yes, it is about some support financially, although there's been a number of the support from the past that is no longer in law, and you got to compete with the big oil companies that get huge tax breaks, but it is also about making sure that the structure's in place to allow for the development of this very important industry to the Midwest.
All right, another question from a listener. Senator Klobachar, if you're reelected, will you serve the full 6-year term in the Senate?
Of course I will. I think my track record shows that. I love working in the Senate. I love representing Minnesota. And I think it is a job that is so important now, as I've explained. We need people in the Senate, and not everyone's like this, that are willing to look for common ground and still stand their ground. Because I think that's the only way you get to higher ground. And you do that by how you treat each other. You do that by working across the aisle. And you do that by making the strong case that the people of this country should have a say. and that we shouldn't let pharma dictate policy. And no, I've been so strong on doing that and trying to get these bills passed. And I'm telling you, after this election, we're going to finally get a vote on Medicare Part D negotiation, because I am tired of waiting.
Jim Newberger, same
issue.
question to you. Would you serve the full term if you're elected?
I absolutely would serve the full term, Lord willing. I will say this, Senator Klobachar has been in office for 12 years, and I would like to thank you for your service, but she wants 6 more. 6 more. That's 18 years. 18 years. What were you doing 18 years ago? What were you doing? So, what were you doing 18 years ago? This is a strong argument for term limits, which I support. 18 years, folks, is a long time to be in the swamp. Now, I'll just leave that with you.
Okay. Can copper nickel mining be done safely in Minnesota? Will it provide long-term jobs in northern Minnesota, or another boom and bust mining situation? Representative.
I'd like to say thank you that's an excellent question. For the folks up on the range, the tariffs were a good thing. It helped the steel industry to get it jump started again. Do we need to expand PolyMet? Yeah, absolutely. Do we need to open it up? We needed to open it up years ago. We are long past the opening date for that. Yeah, if you've been up to the Iron Range, and I've spent a lot of time up on the Iron Range, and I'll tell you right now, that is issue number 1. We have to get that economy going. They could be one of the most prosperous districts in the state, but right now they're not. Their future, their fortune is right under their feet. But because of environmental regulations and because of bureaucratic red tape and because of extreme environmentalism, they will not allow PolyMet to open up. Now, Senator Klobachar, 6 years ago, sat at a table across from Kurt Bills, who was challenging her at that time, up at the Iron Range with the Duluth Chamber of Commerce, and she said, we need regulatory reform so that we can get PolyMet open in this area, so that we can bring economic relief. It's been 6 years. We've got nothing. We've gone in the opposite direction. We must open PolyMet. I serve on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and I've had that honor to do so for 4 years. We can do both. We can copper and nickel mine and be environmentally responsible. The technology exists. We can do that. We can protect the environment, and we can turn around the economy up on the Iron Range.
Okay.
I wholeheartedly support that.
All right, Senator Klobuchar.
Well, I love the Iron Range. My dad grew up there. My grandpa worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines up in Ely, Minnesota. Every day he'd go down in a cave with his black lunchbox down in this tiny little cage just so he could support his family and so my dad and his brother could go to college. So I have focused a lot of my efforts on making sure the Iron Range's economy improves. And we have seen an improvement in that economy. Number one, we have seen the mines reopen, the iron ore mines, because we took on steel dumping, both under President Obama and President Trump. It was taking too long. We brought President Obama's chief of staff up there so he could see firsthand what was going on and meet with the heads of the mining companies and the workers and the steel workers, and I'm so proud to have their support in this election. We worked on that, and we have gotten a lot of those mines reopened, and it's very exciting, some of them expanding. We've also done work on tourism. I head up that caucus in the United States Senate. When it comes to the PolyMet mine, Governor Dayton has supported that mine. I believe in a scientific process, and we've gotten to the point now where that has gotten approved through the process, but there is more work to be done to make sure there's financial assurances to get the land exchange done, something I've worked on. But each and every project, whether it's iron ore, whatever it is, has to be evaluated based on science and based on the safety for the area and balancing the project and the environment. But I am proud that we have worked to improve things up on the range, and I'm not going to stop.
All right, let me turn to a subject that is very important and obviously one crucial to the Senate and that the Senate is key on, and that is national defense. Is military spending too high, too low, or just about right? And Senator, let's stay with you on that one.
Well, I have supported our national defense budget because I see many threats. You know about the terrorism threat that we've seen across the world. You've seen what's happened with Russia, and that is why I've supported our military budget. At the same time, I think we need to be focused more of our resources on things like cyber warfare, which is clearly becoming more than just some boutique issue that you see in a newspaper one day. The Russians especially, as well as other nations, are literally using this to try to bring down our democracy. And this isn't me talking. This is the top security advisors under President Trump talking. And that is why my Secure Elections Act that I passed the funding for with Senator Langford, $380 million that's gone out to the states is one step. But we're going to have to expand this to our power grids where we see threats, malware being installed, just like we saw 2 power plants go down in Ukraine. We're going to have to extend it beyond that. And I am concerned when my opponent, after a meeting decried by Democrats and Republicans between the president and Vladimir Putin, where I believed our president should have stood with the intelligence community instead of standing with Vladimir Putin. Representative Neuberger said it was pretty cool and pretty productive. Those are exact words. I think it's not pretty at all. I think we need to stand up to Vladimir Putin, and you do that with sanctions, and you do that with protecting our own cybersecurity, which has to be a greater part of our military budget across the board.
Okay. Jim Neuberger, first of all, just the big picture, defense spending, and then let's talk about Russia.
No, I appreciate that. America needs a strong military. That's one of the things that has made us great, peace through strength. I believe in the Reagan model of having a strong military. Are we adequately funded? I'm going to say at this point that we could do more. We could absolutely more, especially going into the areas of cybersecurity. One of the things that I'm very disappointed in with Senator Klobachar was earlier at the beginning of the year, there was a vote to continue funding for our military. And she voted against our military. She voted against paying our veterans and our military because she was holding out for DACA. She traded the military for the DACA issue, and she voted against them. I was really disappointed in that. So we need to know where our priorities are. As far as President Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, anytime, a leader from our country can sit down at a table and have a discussion about issues, that is pretty cool. That is what we should be doing. We should be having these discussions. What would you rather us not do? Would you rather have war? We should sit down and talk with these people. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that back in the 1950s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s that a U.S. president would be able to sit down across the table with the leader, the dictator of North Korea, and begin to have a dialogue about having peace? That was one thing that Donald Trump has done. Who would have thought that that would have ever happened? So anytime we sit down with a national leader, regardless of who they are, if we can have a dialogue with them, that is always, that's not pretty cool, it's very cool.
Senator.
I would first remind people that Vladimir Putin, while many presidents have met with the head of Russia, it's what happened afterwards and what he said about it. Vladimir Putin is someone who has poisoned his opponents. He is someone that his regime has paid the way for militants that brought down a plane over Ukraine. This is what we're dealing with. And I did support and do support diplomacy with North Korea. I am glad they are pursuing that, but I will note what I said immediately after that meeting occurred. It doesn't mean anything, especially with a ruthless dictator like Kim Jong-un, unless you have things in writing. We didn't get anything in writing. We didn't get any agreements. There are reports that actually North Korea is expanding some of its nuclear capacity, and just today we found out that the president has asked the Secretary of State not to go meet with them. That's because we didn't get anything in writing. So if you do diplomacy, you have to know how to do it right.
Okay. Representative Neuberger, do you believe North Korea will give up its nuclear weapons? I'm sorry. Do you believe North Korea will give up its nuclear weapons?
I can't predict the future. I sure hope they do. I do. I hope they do. And I think that sitting down at a table and having a negotiation, even if you don't get something in writing. What do? We walk away? Do we walk away? No, you do not. You keep talking to these people and you keep moving with these people until you do get something in writing. And even if you do get something in writing, that's not always a guarantee. But the fact remains that no president, none, had sat down with the North Korean dictators to begin peace talks until Donald Trump was elected.
Okay, I think that is such an interesting statement, given that this president just pulled out of the Iranian nuclear agreement. Because if you look at that, if you want to send a message to North Korea that we're not serious, you get out of agreements that you've already made. The number one priority of our country was to make sure, when it came to foreign policy, that I've heard time and time again, that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. That agreement is still in place, but we're letting Russia and China run it now. And even General Mattis has said that those inspections have been good, that we've gotten information that they're not expanding. So when you talk about don't walk away from the table, someone did walk away from the table, and when it came to that Iranian agreement, and that is this current administration.
I find that to be very disturbing. I find that to be very disturbing in as much as when I sat down and I talked to my friends from the Israeli and the Jewish community, I have Israeli citizens on my executive committee for my campaign. And one of the biggest concerns that they have is that Senator Klobachar supported President Obama's Iranian nuclear deal. They took pallets full of money, full of cash, and they dropped it off at the airport. That was part of the agreement. Not only that, what came out was that 2,500 blank American citizenship certificates were hand-delivered to the Iranian regime for them to fill out to whomever they wanted, because they wanted their people to be protected to become American citizens. If you talk to the folks from Israel, the number one goal of Iran is to destroy Israel. And Senator Klobuchar supported Barack Obama's plan to give Iran eventual nuclear weapons. And you know what, folks? The people from Israel and the Jewish community are absolutely up in arms about that.
All right, let's let Senator Klobuchar respond.
I'm proud of the support I have in the Jewish community. Not everyone agreed on the details of that agreement. I actually would have negotiated parts of it differently, but in the end, I was given an agreement that I felt that if we backed away from that moment with the rest of the world, we would have given up American power to have a say in how we monitor those nuclear capabilities, how we